This video is going to be all about the dreaded service four-wheel drive light that's all too common on the Jeep Wrangler JL and Jeep Gladiator platforms. I'm going to show you some fixes, bypasses, and exactly what was wrong with mine on my 2020 Jeep Gladiator Rubicon. Now I'll be the first to tell you there are a lot of reasons why you might have a service four-wheel drive light, but maybe the most common has to do with a failure at the FAD, which is your front axle disconnect. Now, regardless of trim level, inside of every JL, Wrangler, Jeep Gladiator, you will have this style of two-piece axle shaft. And this is how it works. So this is sort of the mid shaft that goes to the differential. It sleeves over here. And when you're off-road and you want to go into four-wheel drive, the motor actually guides this collar over and it waits for the shafts to line up. And then now you have both shafts turning at the same speed. When you're ready to get off the trail, the collar slides back over and now the shafts can spin independently from one another. Now there are three common things you need to look at if you think your FAD is failing. The first one, you want to look at the plug itself. It's very common for that plug to come dislodged, whether it's because you put a lift kit on in your garage and it just got a little overextended, or you went off-road and you hit something. Look at the plug first. Secondly, look at the wiring on the back side of that plug and see if a wire got overextended or maybe caught on something. Very common with the FAD. The last thing is going to be your hardest field fix, which is going to be with the motor itself. If the FAD motor just has failed and it's not moving that collar, there's really not much you can do once you're on the trail. Unfortunately, if the FAD motor has failed and you're not engaged into four-wheel drive, you've got a few issues. Not only is this passenger side not going to pull, but the driver's side's not going to pull because your spider gears are basically going to spin to the side with the least amount of resistance. Now, if you have a Rubicon, you might think, well, I can just engage my front locker and at least the driver's side will pull. Unfortunately, when you get a service four-wheel drive light, what happens is it locks you out of the factory lockers if you're still using the factory locker switches. So that's going to be an issue. Now there are some very easy solutions and preventative measures that you can take if you're worried about the FAD failing. The probably best case scenario in terms of getting ahead of this, get rid of the two-piece axle shaft and go with a single straight axle shaft. Companies like RCV Performance specialize in single-piece axle shaft. That's a good upgrade. If you want to do something that's a little bit more budget, there are FAD delete kits that effectively just put a giant collar so you're already engaged all the time. Another solution that's fairly easy that you could keep with you is the FAD engagement plates that come on like the back of the Wrangler 392, and it's just a plate that has that sort of blocked off C that keeps it engaged all the time. That plate's about 80 bucks, so you could carry it with you, so if something does happen, at least you've got that fail safe. It's also worth noting that if you do decide to delete the FAD, you're going to need some sort of programmer like a Taser JL Mini to tell the computer to no longer look for that front axle disconnect. On my specific Gladiator, I don't have a FAD. I actually have a completely different axle set. I've got a Dynatrac Pro Rock XD60. It's a high pinion up front and a low pinion out back. This is a full float, essentially 1-ton axle set. And when I lost I got the service four-wheel drive light, I was in Windrock Park and I still had four-wheel drive because you still have mechanical linkage at the transfer case. There was no FAD motor to disconnect, but what I did lose were the lockers and the sway bar disconnect motor because all of that stuff is interconnected, and I was using Taser harness from Z Automotive to allow me to use the factory locker control. So I had a big problem. Now, here are a few things that I went through to troubleshoot, and if you're going through the same issue, this is what I would recommend doing. The first thing I did is look at the trouble codes I have a Taser from Z Automotive, and you can go into your DTC, show you your options of, okay, this is what the computer is saying is wrong. And unfortunately, my codes were a little generic. Not only did I have one that was saying there was a transfer case module communication error, but I also had an issue with a evap code. It was a high pressure thing for the gas tank, so I had some stuff going on that didn't really make sense. I had service four-wheel drive light flashing, I had the sway bar disconnect motor flashing. The first thing you want to do is get under the Jeep and just start chasing wire. So anything that's connected with the four-wheel drive system, look at your harness going to the front axle, look at the harness going to the actual sway bar disconnect, check those plugs, same thing all the way back. And I did all that. I actually took the wheel speed sensors out in the back because I was getting an ABS error code as well, and I thought, oh, this might be it. So I cleaned those off, and then that didn't do anything for a quick field fix. So I ended up coming back, driving all the way back home. Windrock, unfortunately, is about a 1,000-mile round trip for me. So I kind of had to cut my wheeling a little bit short. Came home and started going through the next more advanced level of stuff. And you know, don't overlook the simple stuff. Check your fuses. I did all that. Just check and see if you've got loose plugs. Anything like that can definitely create an issue. The other thing is to really start to deep dive into wiring that could be melted or anything that got hot. That's a common issue as well, especially on the passenger side. You know, it's a little bit more compact. That's where a lot of your wiring is. I went through and I did all of that, and I still wasn't finding anything. So I ended up downloading an app called JScan, and I used this plug adapter and Bluetooth adapter that goes into your body control module, and it's a very, very handy app. You can actually see things like cylinder misfire, turn on and off different parameters, and actually drive the vehicle and read data in real time. That was a very handy app, but unfortunately it didn't really uncover any obvious fixes for me. It just kept saying it lost communication with the transfer case. Now, I went through, this Jeep's out of warranty, and said, all right, I will try some common issues with transfer case miscommunication. One was being transfer case position sensor. That was not the case of a fix for me, so that was a $100 part that did not fix it. And then I went with the more expensive part, which is the transfer case control module, which is actually located behind the rear seats on this, behind this big plastic panel, which I'll tell you right now, if you break it, it's a $400 panel that's very difficult to get. And the plastic is super delicate. I don't think Jeep anticipated you taking it on and off very often. I bought a $200 module, plugged it in, and unfortunately that wasn't my fix either. So after diving through modules and running through all obvious wiring and fuses, I was a little stumped, and I went through the obvious things that the internet says, and I obviously went through everything that I could, as educated as I could, and went through anything that I had done, because I was using those taser modules to actuate the lockers. And so I actually unplugged those and decided, you know what, I won't ever run this risk of this happening again. I actually bypassed all of my modules and hooked up my lockers directly to my VO switch, and now all of my lockers, which I've got an ARB in the rear and an Eaton in the front, I control by the switch panel on my A-pillar. So I bypassed any potential issue there, and I'll show you what I did with the sway bar here in just a minute. Ultimately, I couldn't figure it out. I still had this check engine light that didn't make sense because it wasn't a loose gas cap. It just, that wasn't lining up correctly. And then I had this transfer case issue that I threw a bunch of parts at and wasn't fixing the problem. So I ended up kind of having to tap out. I needed to get to somebody with a better computer. At least that's what I felt like. And the only real option for that was to take my Jeep to a dealership. And my local dealership is horrible. They've had, we have not had a very good relationship over the years. So I ended up talking to some friends that recommended a dealership about an hour outside of where I live in Wilmington, with a dealership in Whiteville. And it's Vann, Underwood, Jeep, Dodge, Chrysler. And they were fantastic. I called the service writer, talked to Robert, and I said, hey, this is what I got going on. It's a out of warranty vehicle. I'd like to participate as much as I can, or at least see what's going on. I can work with your tech to kind of explain what I've sort of checked and modified and that sort of thing. And they were incredibly accommodating. Now, this is where things are a little weird. I checked all the fuses when I had this initial problem, and we got under here and checked fuse F40, and he found that it was blown. Not only was it blown, it was indicating that there was a short in the system somewhere. Now, the fuse F40 on the JL and on the Gladiator, that is for your DTCM. It's a transfer case control module, but it also controls the lockers on the Jeep. Now, I'd already bypassed the lockers at this point at home, so I thought, well, that was kind of weird. So he said, look, I'm still showing a short here. Let's just start going through the harness again and just see if maybe something got overlooked. And that's what we started to do, going through every single bit of this harness just to see if something had chafed or torn or got messed up. And ultimately, it's kind of crazy what he found had nothing to do with the locker harness or anything like that. His eagle eye saw I had some wires by my fuel filler neck in the back that are more exposed because I do have this flatbed conversion. He said, those Mopar wires don't usually bend that well. He's like, that seems like a really hard bend for them. And I'm like, well, that's how those wires have been for over a year since I did the bed conversion. I didn't think that there's any way that they would be messed up or disconnected or anything. Sure enough, he was 100% right. Undid the harness, and I had 3 broken wires. Now, this is where I tell you that wire setup, I totally get how it has everything to do with why I had a voltage issue for the gas cap and all that, and you know, the pressure for the tank, but it shouldn't have anything to do with the lockers. However, he fixed those, soldered them, got them all put back together. We went and checked, and I no longer showed a short at fuse F40. Doesn't make sense, but in some weird way that must be connected at somehow. So put a new fuse in, new wires connected. Computer was still showing that there was an issue in short, but I wasn't popping the fuse. So we ultimately updated the powertrain kind of control module, the entire computer for the truck. Keeping in mind, I have a taser on here, so I never had to unplug the taser. I think it's kind of worth noting. Everybody talks about worrying about that for warranty. We never unplugged it. They were familiar with the taser. They knew what it was. Again, I wasn't there for warranty work. This was me paying out of my pocket to get my Jeep worked on so I could get access to that computer and we could really see what was going on. So we updated all of the modules, and suddenly it was communicating again. I got back in, went through and turned off all of the lockers so it doesn't see the lockers anymore. Had to turn back off the steering because I've got hydraulic assist, turn back off the sway bar to say it doesn't have that, and went through everything, cycled the key a couple times, and that was it. No longer did I have a service four-wheel drive light, no check engine light, and I was kind of blown away. And he was a little confused too. He's like, that doesn't really make sense, but maybe somehow or another this thing shares something. So I've got full wiring schematics on how everything is connected at this point. So if I ever have an issue again, wiring wise, I should be able to chase it down a little bit more easily. As I mentioned, I went ahead and bypassed my lockers, which is pretty easy because I had aftermarket controls to be able to do that. You can actually do this with the factory as well. You can get harnesses to plug right into your lockers and run either to your factory auxiliary switch bank if you have that, or you can be like me and do the A-pillar mount, so you can easily bypass your locker controls, so you'll never have that issue. Now, if you have the Rubicon sway bar disconnect like I do, what I ended up doing is getting this Evo Manufacturing No Limit sway bar, and I say it's a sway bar, it's just a thread-in knob, and you unbolt the motor off of the sway bar and you bolt on this knob, and what it does is when you screw it in, it disconnects the sway bar, and when you thread it back out, it locks in. For me, I always have to get out to lock in my hubs. It's just one more thing to do. It's pretty easy to reach your arm in and grab it. I was a little worried about it at first, but if you know, on the Rubicon, the sway bar automatically reconnects at 20 miles an hour, something like that. Now, you don't ever have to worry about that. So if you're like me and you like to drive a little fast off-road, it's perfect. You basically never have to worry about it reconnecting, and there's not an issue with it. I think it's like 130 bucks. I mean, it's an expensive little thing for what it is. But I was really happy to have it. I can, now that I have everything fixed, put the motor back on. There's nothing wrong with it. It only takes 3 bolts to do the whole upgrade or bypass, if you will. I recommend it just if you're someone that likes to go fast and you want to eliminate an issue. Apparently, the sway bar motor plugs are very, very notorious for failing. I haven't experienced that, but it was another thing that I learned at the dealership that, yeah, they've definitely seen that as well. So hopefully you guys found this helpful. I know when my service four-wheel drive went on, I was Googling like everybody else, and there were 1,000 different answers, and at least I feel like now I know what are the more common issues, even though, again, mine wasn't a common one, but at least I do know what that is now, and so on the other Jeeps I can be a little more aware of that. If you have any questions, just drop them in the comments. If you got any, want to see some stuff behind the scenes or what I'm doing, you can give me a follow on Instagram at Ali Mansour Editor, and until next time, I hope to see you guys on the trail. Take care. Thanks for sticking around to the end. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please consider subscribing to the Driving Line channel. Our goal is to excite, entertain, and educate you on all things automotive. So if you want to come be part of our journey, please hit that subscribe button, and we hope to see you on the next video. Take care.